All right. Well, I'm Soleille Miller. I'm a PhD candidate from the University of New South Wales, and today I'm going to be sharing some results from my first chapter, looking at the population structure and consequences of asexuality in the Australian peppermint stick insect. So Megahernia batesii is a native Australian insect found in the wet tropics of North Queensland. These beasts are quite interesting from an evolutionary standpoint because they have this rare ability to reproduce both sexually and asexually, a phenomenon known as facultative parthenogenesis. So what this means is that if females mate, they produce both sons and daughters from fertilized eggs, but if females can avoid mating, they produce only daughters from unfertilized eggs. This system is actually flexible, allowing the female to reproduce both ways within her lifetime. So their unusual reproductive system has allowed for an interesting pattern to emerge in their natural range, a mosaic of sexual and asexual populations. This variation of reproductive modes occurs on a very small spatial scale, with no obvious environmental barriers or differences in the habitat between the sexual and asexual populations. We did, however, find a large estuary that separates populations in the north from populations in the south, represented here as a white dashed line. So this pattern presents us with many questions. Specifically, how did these patterns arise and what happens in this system when sex is lost? So this system has the potential to show us repeated local losses of sex on a microevolutionary timescale. This provides a unique opportunity for us to study those genetic consequences of early transitions to asexual reproduction in the wild. So to further understand this pattern, I use single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, obtained from reduced representation genomic data of individuals sampled from these populations. So I found that the populations actually cluster genetically by geographic location rather than reproductive mode. So here's my cluster analysis with the red shading indicating individuals from mixed sex populations and the lack of shading representing individuals from all female populations. The north, as you can see here, contained mostly sexual populations, and the south contained mostly asexual populations. Importantly, the sexual populations in the south are more closely related to other southern populations, regardless of reproductive mode, and vice versa with the asexual populations in the north. This suggests that, in line with theoretical predictions, asexual strategies may be outcompeting their sexual counterparts in the short term, leading to male extinction in the south. I then looked at the admixture within the populations and found that most of the individuals had 100% membership probability with only other individuals in that population. This genetic structure reflects those spatial distances, with very little gene flow between the populations. So these populations being isolated despite their close proximity suggests that something is preventing males from invading these all-female populations, whether that's because of low dispersal or reproductive isolation, or female resistance tactics is yet to be understood. Finally, I looked at the genetic diversity of the populations by calculating heterozygosity values for each individual. So heterozygosity is a commonly used parameter to estimate genetic variation within and between populations and individuals. So I found that most samples from mixed sex populations actually had much higher heterozygosity values than samples from all female populations. This drastic difference in heterozygosity appears to be a consequence of the mechanism of parthenogenesis used by M. batesii. So the interesting part of this result is that these asexual populations have such low heterozygosity, yet they're still able to persist in the wild. So this could be because the asexual populations already have the optimal genotypes for their environment, in which case they will continue to survive and prosper given that their environment doesn't change too much. So, given the possible loss of sex, the isolation of the populations, and the genetic consequences associated with those shifts to asexuality, a changing climate has the potential to spell doom for these charismatic creatures. Thank you all for your time and attention.